What happens when the president of a nation stops his motorcade for a forgotten woman in the street? When Ibrahim Traoré saw a frail figure clutching a weathered notebook, he had no idea he was about to meet the person who once changed his life, the teacher who taught him how to read. But what followed wasn't just a reunion. It became a movement of gratitude, dignity, and national healing. This isn't fiction. This is real. And it might be the most heartwarming undercover story you'll see this year. If you've ever had a teacher who believed in you before the world did, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because sometimes the most powerful lessons in leadership come not from power, but from memory. On a heavy gray morning in March 2024, the streets of Ouagadougou seemed to wear the weight of time. In the Samandan district, where the city's tired bricks leaned like elders and the air hung still with dust, an elderly woman sat quietly against a red wall. Her name was Madame Ahata. She looked as if she had blended into the background, just another figure passed over by the world. Her tattered white t-shirt exposed skin that had weathered 6 decades of sun, labor, and silence. Strands of gray hair fell from a loose scarf, but in her lap rested something carefully preserved. A faded notebook, old and fragile, but cradled like a treasure. She opened it gently. Inside were scribbled words, old lessons from another time. One name appeared over and over again, written in crooked lines by a child's eager hand. Ibrahim. At that exact moment, not far away, a military jeep moved slowly down the street, part of President Ibrahim Traoré's unannounced visit to observe Ouagadougou without filters. When he glanced out the window, something about the seated figure struck him. A shape from the past, a presence he could not place but couldn't ignore. "Stop here," he told the driver. The vehicle halted. Soldiers stiffened. The president stepped out alone. He didn't know her name yet, but he was about to walk into the most important story of his life. The president walked forward slowly, his boots brushing the dusty pavement. The woman didn't look up. Her gaze was locked on the notebook in her hands, her fingers gently stroking the curled edges of its pages. Something stirred in him, a feeling both foreign and familiar. As he drew closer, his heart quickened. "Madame," he said gently. She looked up, her cloudy eyes taking a second to focus. Then her entire face changed. It was as if the years melted away and time itself paused. Her voice cracked through the quiet air. Ibrahim Traoré." He knelt beside her, overcome. "Yes, it's me." She tried to rise, but her body trembled from weakness. Ibrahim reached forward, steadying. "It's really you," she whispered again, now in disbelief. "The boy who could never sit still. The one who wrote his name 5 times on every page just to practice." Tears welled in his eyes. She opened the notebook and pointed to a faded line. There it was, his name, in uneven block letters, written over 2 decades ago. "I kept it all these years," she said. "I always knew you would do something big." He pressed his palm to the page, feeling the fragile paper like a sacred bond. Around them, the alley was silent, but inside Ibrahim, emotions surged like a rising tide. Gratitude, guilt, memory, and awe. She smiled faintly. "When I saw you on TV, I cried with pride, but I never imagined." She looked around, at her surroundings, and her voice faded. Ibrahim took her hand. "You gave me the tools to dream, now let me help you live with dignity." In that alley on that gray morning, the past and future met, not in a palace or parade, but on the pavement between a leader and the teacher who believed in him first. The president helped Madame Ahata to her feet. She was light, too light. Her bones felt brittle and her grip was frail, but her eyes still held a spark that Ibrahim recognized. He guided her gently toward the jeep, but before they could take another step, she sat back down on the edge of the walkway, clutching the notebook to her chest. "What happened?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her once again. She looked away, her voice a whisper. "After I retired, my husband passed. My children went abroad, France, I think, but they stopped writing. Debts piled up, and one day my house, was gone. That was 3 years ago. She smiled bitterly. I still wake up hoping it's a nightmare. Ibrahim's jaw clenched. The pain in her voice struck deeper than any political debate. 3 years on the street? He asked, stunned. She nodded. The only thing I had left was this notebook. Her fingers brushed the cover, because it reminded me of when I had purpose, when I mattered. Around them, the city buzzed like nothing had happened. But for Ibrahim, the world had just tilted. I used to pray that one of my old students would find me, she added, chuckling without joy. But who would remember an old woman like me? I did, he said, voice tight with emotion, and I always will. He turned to Captain Sawadogo. Food, water, now. Then he faced her again. You gave me a future. When I was just a boy with dusty shoes and stubborn hands, I won't let your story end like this. And in that instant, the motorcade was forgotten, the presidency forgotten. What remained was a man repaying a debt no title could ever match. Madame Ahata had barely finished sipping the bottle of water before a warm loaf of bread was placed into her hands by one of the aides. She looked at it like a treasure, hesitant, as if unsure whether she was allowed to accept such kindness. Ibrahim watched quietly, then crouched beside her once more. You're coming with me, he said. She shook her head gently. I don't want pity, Ibrahim. I'm still proud. I can't be a burden. This is not pity, he answered, voice low and unwavering. This is justice. You helped build who I am. You deserve more than this. She stared at him, overwhelmed. Her hands trembled around the bread. I don't even remember the last time someone called me important, she whispered. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You're the most important person I've met this week. He stood, signaling to Captain Sawadogo. Help her into the jeep. Tell the kitchen to prepare a proper meal. Clean clothes. I want a doctor waiting. Sawadogo saluted and moved swiftly. As they lifted Madame Ahata gently, Ibrahim walked beside her, shielding her from the gazes that gathered in the alley. To the bystanders, it looked like a president helping a beggar. But to Ibrahim, it was something much deeper, a student finally lifting up the hand that once guided his. As she was settled in the back of the jeep, Ibrahim sat beside her, the worn notebook now tucked into his coat like a sacred scroll. He looked out at the horizon. Let's go, he said. First stop, the base. Then we'll rebuild everything else. And with that, the convoy rolled forward, not as a show of power, but as a moving tribute to a forgotten teacher who would now be forgotten no more. The jeep rolled into the military base on the edge of Ouagadougou, past saluting guards and wide-eyed soldiers. The unexpected passenger next to President Traoré drew quiet stares, but no one questioned. In this moment, Ibrahim's silence was command enough. He stepped out first and opened the door for Madame Ahata himself. She hesitated, still unsure if all this was real. The same woman who had once taught a class of barefoot children in a crumbling mudroom now stepped onto polished ground, her legs trembling. This way, madam, Ibrahim said gently. They led her into a clean, modest guest room. A basin of warm water, a simple bed, and folded clothes awaited her. Before she could protest, a soft knock sounded at the door. A cook entered, carrying a steaming plate, rice, peanut sauce, and fresh mango slices. Ahata sat slowly, inhaling deeply. Her hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. She took one bite, then paused. Tears filled her eyes. I forgot what warm food tasted like, she said. Ibrahim sat beside her, silent, watching. A military doctor soon arrived to check on her. Malnourished, he said softly, but with rest she'll recover. Good, Ibrahim replied. She stays here tonight, let her rest, eat, and feel human again. When everyone left the room, Ibrahim placed the old notebook on the bedside table. Tomorrow, he whispered, we start again. And for the first time in years, Madame Ahata slept not under open sky, but beneath a roof with a full stomach and a flicker of hope warming her chest. The next morning, Golden light poured through the slats of the guest room's window. Madame Ahata stirred under crisp sheets, blinking slowly as unfamiliar comfort wrapped around her. She sat up, startled at first, then remembered. She wasn't in the alley anymore. A knock came at the door. A young soldier respectfully handed her a small tray with tea and bread, and a fresh blue tunic folded neatly on top. She changed slowly, her movements stiff, but with each stretch she felt her body come back to life. Meanwhile, in the base's operations room, Ibrahim Traoré stood over a desk, flipping through her notebook. The same crooked letters he had scrawled as a boy now seemed like scripture, etched proof of her legacy. Captain Sawadogo entered. "Doctor says she's stronger today, much better spirit." Ibrahim nodded. "But we're not finished." He closed the notebook and gave his next command. "She needs a home, somewhere safe, clean, and simple. But more than that, she needs a reason to rise every morning." Sawadogo raised an eyebrow. "A job?" "A purpose," Ibrahim said. "She's a teacher. That hasn't changed." "A small classroom. 10 children to start. I'll pay for it myself if I must." Back in her room, Madame Ahata looked out the window as birds fluttered past. She didn't know yet what was coming, but in her chest, the heaviness had lifted. For the first time in years, the day ahead felt like something to look forward to. And in the notebook on the desk nearby, a boy's misspelled name sat waiting, ready to write a new chapter. 1 week later, in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, a small classroom buzzed with quiet excitement. 10 children, ages 6 to 8, sat at newly painted desks, their faces full of curiosity and wonder. At the front of the room stood Madame Ahata, her posture straight, her spirit newly ignited. She wore a soft blue dress and her hair was tied back neatly. The chalk felt oddly familiar in her fingers, like shaking hands with an old friend. She turned to the blackboard, hesitated for a breath, and then began to write. "Hope," she spelled out in clear, careful strokes. The children echoed her, their small voices uniting in a gentle chorus. Outside the doorway, Ibrahim Traoré stood silently, arms crossed, his heart full. He watched the teacher who once lit his path now passing that same light to a new generation. For a moment he was no longer the president, but just a boy again, learning to spell his dreams. When Madame Ahata turned and saw him, their eyes met. She didn't speak, but the look of gratitude and pride said everything. One child raised his hand. "Is it true you taught the president?" She smiled, her eyes soft. "I did, but today I get to teach you." And with that, the lesson truly began. The air in the classroom was thick with possibility. Not one camera, not one reporter. Just the chalk, the children, and a woman reclaiming her purpose. News of Madame Ahata's return to teaching spread faster than wildfire in the dry season. Parents who had long given up on formal education for their children began bringing them to her modest classroom. From 10 children, the class grew to 15, then 20. Desks were added, books donated, and volunteers began arriving. What began as a reunion became a revival. One afternoon, President Traoré returned quietly. There were no cameras, no press, just him dressed in civilian clothes. As he stepped into the classroom, the children stood and shouted, "President!" in joyful unison. Madame Ahata turned and her face softened. "You came back," she said. He smiled, walking toward her with an envelope. "This is for the school. For more books, more desks, more children." Tears brimmed in her eyes. "You've done enough already." "No," he replied, "not yet. This isn't about repaying the past anymore. It's about investing in the future." He turned to the children. "Study well. One day, one of you might be standing where I am." They nodded, eyes wide with hope. As he left the classroom, he paused by the door, watching Ahata once more, chalk in hand, surrounded by eager faces. Then he reached into his jacket, touched the old notebook still in his pocket, and smiled. The story of the boy who never forgot his teacher had become more than inspiration. It had become policy, a symbol, a movement. And, for the first time in a long time, Burkina Faso wasn't just learning history, it was making it. She once gave him letters, now he gave her legacy. This isn't just the story of a student who made it big. It's the story of a teacher whose impact never faded, even when the world turned its back. And it's the reminder we all needed, that no act of kindness ever truly disappears. It just waits to be returned. Let this be the video that restores your faith in humanity. Tell us in the comments, who was the teacher that changed your life? Share this with someone who needs to believe in hope again. And remember, sometimes the smallest notebook holds the future of an entire nation.